Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and the clue that changed everything, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Caller. The phone rang sharply in the otherwise silent, candlelit room. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound almost deafening in the stillness. Hercule Poirot sat at his desk, his fingers steepled before his lips, his mind engaged in a dance of quiet contemplation. The shrill sound of the telephone, however, sliced through his thoughts. He hesitated, eyes narrowing, as he studied the object with suspicion, as if the very instrument of communication were an intruder to his calm. It rang again, persistent and urgent. Mon Dieu, Poirot muttered softly, his French accent lending an almost melodic quality to his frustration. He lifted the receiver with deliberate slowness, as though every second counted. Poirot, he spoke crisply into the mouthpiece, what is it that you wish to tell me, mon ami? There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by the faintest sound, a soft, almost imperceptible gasp. The voice that emerged was low, trembling, and laced with terror. Detective Poirot, you must come. There is a matter most urgent. The voice broke off, and Poirot's trained ear detected the faintest rustle, as if something, or someone, was moving about in the background. His fingers tightened around the receiver. Who are you? Poirot's voice, though polite, carried an unmistakable edge. Tell me, who is this, and what is the nature of the emergency? But the response was not what Poirot had expected. I cannot say, the voice stammered, growing ever more frantic. They're coming for me. You must hurry, Poirot. The game is afoot. The clue is hidden. It all starts with the letter. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the line went dead. Poirot stood frozen for a moment, the receiver still held to his ear. His mind, however, was already racing. A mystery, of course. It always begins this way. A call in the night, the promise of danger, the scent of the unknown wafting through the air. But there was something about the voice, the fear, the urgency, that nagged at him. His instincts, finely honed over years of experience, told him that this was no ordinary case. He set the receiver back into its cradle and immediately rose from his desk. His movements were precise, calm, as though the very act of standing up demanded as much consideration as the most complex of cases. Ah, Hastings, Poirot murmured to himself, as if to summon his long-time companion, if only you were here to witness this mystery unfold. Poirot moved swiftly to the coat rack, his dark suit impeccable even in the dim candlelight. The old house creaked underfoot as he retrieved his coat, his eyes momentarily scanning the room. His gaze lingered on a letter sitting atop his desk, an envelope with an unfamiliar seal, an unfinished case he had yet to revisit. But tonight, this call took precedence. As he stepped into the night, the cold air seemed to match the chill that had begun to settle in his heart. The streets were deserted, a fine mist rolling in from the river, wrapping the world in a veil of secrecy. Poirot's mind, however, was already focusing on the voice, on the cryptic words it had uttered. The clue is hidden. It all starts with the letter. What letter? And where? These were the questions that would guide his steps. As the cab drove through the winding streets, Poirot's thoughts turned to the few details he could recall. The voice had spoken of a game. That was interesting. A game, indeed, always involves rules, and those who break them. But what was the game here? Poirot's mind worked with fluid precision, sifting through the limited information he had. A clue, a letter, and someone in peril. There was danger, and there was deceit. He could feel it. The cab pulled up to a large, imposing building. A mansion of sorts, though it seemed oddly out of place in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. Poirot studied the structure, his sharp eyes catching details others might overlook. The overgrown ivy creeping along the walls, the faint light seeping from the windows. It seemed abandoned, but Poirot knew better than to trust appearances. Every detail, every seemingly inconsequential element, could be a key. He stepped out of the cab and approached the front door. His hand hovered over the brass knocker, pausing for a fraction of a second before he lifted it and let it fall. The echo was immediate, ringing out into the cold night. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the dim light, was a woman. She was dressed in black, her features obscured by shadows. But Poirot could tell she was frightened. Her eyes were wide, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the door frame. "You are Detective Poirot?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper, as if the very act of speaking was a betrayal. "I am," he replied calmly, his tone always even, no matter the circumstances. "And you are—" "Charlotte Mallory," she said, stepping back to allow him inside. "Please come in. I don't know who else to turn to. I fear for my life." Poirot entered the house, his gaze sweeping over the interior. The grand hallway was dimly lit, but the shadows that filled the space seemed to deepen as he moved forward. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps from upstairs. Perhaps someone else was present. "Tell me everything, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice steady. "And do not omit anything, however insignificant it may seem." Charlotte Mallory led him into a drawing room where a fire burned low in the hearth. The room was lavishly furnished, but Poirot's sharp eyes noted the signs of neglect. Dust had begun to settle on the furniture, and a faint, musty smell lingered in the air. She sat down on the edge of a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I received a letter," she began, her voice trembling. "It arrived this morning, and it spoke of something terrible, something I could not ignore. The letter said that my life was in danger, and that I would be blamed for a crime I did not commit. It warned me that someone would come for me." Poirot's mind immediately went to work. A letter? A threat? But why? What crime was she being accused of? "Who would send such a letter?" Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing. "Who would wish to harm you, mademoiselle?" Charlotte hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the window. I don't know, but I believe it is someone I trusted, someone I thought was my friend." Poirot nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "And this friend, mademoiselle, can you tell me who they are?" Before Charlotte could respond, there was a loud thud from upstairs, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Poirot's senses sharpened. He had learned long ago that danger often had a way of announcing itself. Without a word, he rose from his chair, his movements swift and deliberate. "Stay here, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice commanding. "I shall investigate." He ascended the staircase with quiet steps, his eyes scanning the shadows. The house felt strangely alive, the creaking floors almost as if they were speaking. Poirot's hand hovered over his revolver, but his mind was still working. The clue, the letter, everything felt connected. At the top of the stairs, he found the door to a study ajar. Inside, a figure stood by the window, staring out into the night. A man, tall, dark-haired, and wearing a suit that looked slightly disheveled. Poirot stepped inside. "I trust you are not the one making the noise, monsieur?" he asked, his voice sharp. The man turned around, his eyes flashing with recognition. And something more. Fear, perhaps? But Poirot did not miss the subtle way the man's hand lingered by his coat pocket. A subtle but telling gesture. I didn't mean to disturb," the man said, his voice tense, "but there's something you need to see." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Something to see, you say? But what, monsieur?" The man hesitated before stepping toward the desk, reaching for a letter that lay there. He handed it to Poirot without a word. Poirot unfolded it carefully, reading the words written in jagged handwriting. "The game is over. The truth will be revealed soon. Beware the shadows." Poirot's eyes flicked to the man. "I believe you have much to explain, monsieur," he said, his voice colder now. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still much he needed to uncover. The game, indeed, was just beginning. Chapter 2. A Note in the Dark. The light flickered one last time before it went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Hercule Poirot stood perfectly still, his senses heightened. Not a sound, not a movement, only the haunting whisper of the wind outside, swirling against the windows of the old manor. The sudden absence of the flame had only added to the suspense, as if nature itself was conspiring to deepen the mystery. Then the faintest noise, a soft, rustling sound, emerged from the shadows. Poirot's sharp ears detected it immediately. A shifting of fabric, the scuff of a shoe on the old wooden floor. A hidden presence, just out of view, moving with deliberate slowness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered under his breath. He did not need to turn to know. The intruder was within reach, waiting. A moment later, a small, crumpled note landed at his feet, gliding effortlessly across the polished floor like a silent threat. Poirot bent down and picked it up with a measured precision, his fingers brushing against the paper as though it were a delicate artifact, fragile, yet so full of potential danger. He unfolded the note with the same care, and as he did, the room seemed to hold its breath. The message was simple, but no less chilling. "The letter lies in the dark, and so too will you." A cold shiver ran down Poirot's spine, and for a split second he allowed himself the luxury of a pause. His mind, always so organized, worked in swift, fluid motions, analyzing every possible meaning behind the cryptic words. The letter lies in the dark. His mind replayed the earlier conversation with Charlotte Mallory. The letter, and then it struck him. The game had just begun, but the rules had already shifted. "A note in the dark," Poirot murmured aloud, his voice soft yet deliberate. "How convenient, no? To send a message concealed in the very shadows that frighten us most." His sharp eyes scanned the room with a calm intensity. There was more to this than met. The eye. He could feel it. The clue was right in front of him, yet the true meaning seemed to escape him for now. His fingers traced the edges of the note, feeling for any irregularities that could reveal more than the words alone. Behind him, Charlotte Mallory's voice broke the silence, a tremor unmistakable in her tone. "What does it mean, Poirot? What have you found?" Poirot did not turn. He had learned long ago that sometimes the answers are in the smallest of gestures. the slightest shifts in demeanor. He could hear Charlotte's breath quicken, the way her footsteps faltered as she approached him. Was it fear or guilt? The note speaks of something that lies hidden, something obscured by darkness, Poirot said carefully, his words weighted with meaning. But I wonder, mademoiselle, if you know more of this letter than you are letting on. Charlotte hesitated, a clear sign of uncertainty. She bit her lip, her hands now clasped tightly before her. The air between them was thick with tension. She was hiding something, Poirot was certain of it. But what? Was it the fear of an unknown enemy, or something more, something darker? Poirot, I swear I don't know anything more, she stammered, her voice wavering. I've told you everything. I've been trying to protect myself, protect you. And yet, Poirot interrupted gently, turning to face her with that piercing gaze that seemed to see straight through her. You would not have called me here if you truly had nothing to hide. Charlotte flinched, and for a moment, Poirot thought he saw something. A flicker of recognition, perhaps. Her shoulders slumped, and she glanced away, clearly unsettled. I received another letter, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Just before you arrived. The handwriting was the same as the first. It warned me not to trust anyone, not even you. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Another letter? The pieces were beginning to fit together, but just barely. And yet, a question lingered. Why had she not mentioned this earlier? Was she truly frightened? Or had she played her cards too early, trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage? And this second letter, Poirot asked, his voice still calm, but now tinged with a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. What did it say, mademoiselle? Charlotte hesitated again, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sleeve. She glanced around the room, her eyes shifting between the walls as if she were searching for an escape. Then she met Poirot's gaze, a mixture of fear and something else behind her eyes. It wasn't quite guilt, but it was something more than mere nervousness. It said, she trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to collect her thoughts. It said that the truth will be revealed soon, that the letter would lead me to something important. Poirot's mind reeled. The truth will be revealed. How many times had he heard that phrase in his long career? Each time it had been a precursor to deceit, to hidden agendas lurking just beneath the surface. Charlotte Mallory was hiding something, and whatever it was far more dangerous than it appeared. He glanced down at the note in his hand once more, the words staring back at him, taunting him with their ambiguity. And then something about the paper's texture caught his eye. A slight wrinkle at the corner of the note, almost invisible, as if it had been hastily folded and then smoothed out again. His fingertips pressed down gently on the crease, and the note gave way slightly, revealing something hidden beneath. A second, much smaller note, folded within the first. Poirot's eyes flicked up to Charlotte, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. A second note. How very clever. Charlotte's face blanched as she saw what Poirot had uncovered. I didn't know it was there. I didn't... Ah, but human nature, mademoiselle. Poirot interrupted smoothly, his voice dripping with quiet certainty. It never changes. You knew, deep inside, that the truth was right there, and yet you hoped it would remain hidden. With deliberate precision, Poirot unfolded the second note. The message was shorter, but no less sinister. It's not who you think it is. A rush of realization struck Poirot like a sudden blow. Not who you think it is. His mind flicked to the various suspects, each of them at one point or another, having been caught in his sights. Could it be someone he had ruled out too quickly? Or was there someone else at play? Someone hiding in plain sight? The pieces of the puzzle shifted once more, and Poirot could feel the invisible threads of the mystery drawing tighter around him. There was someone in this house who was lying to him, and Charlotte Mallory was more deeply involved than she had led him to believe. She knew more than she was admitting. Mon Dieu, Poirot muttered to himself. The game, it is afoot. But who is the true player here? The answer, he suspected, was not as simple as he had initially believed. There was more to this than just a note in the dark. The shadows were gathering, and somewhere among them, the truth waited, hidden, but not for long. With one last glance at Charlotte, Poirot turned toward the door. I shall take my leave for now, mademoiselle. But mark my words, he added, his voice cool and controlled. I will find the answer, and when I do, no shadow shall remain to conceal it. As he stepped out into the night, the wind howled louder, and the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. But Poirot knew that even in the deepest shadows, the light of truth would find its way through, and nothing would stop him from uncovering it. Chapter 3. The Case That Began with a Lie. The storm raged outside, the wind howling against the ancient windows of the manor, while inside, the flickering candlelight cast elongated shadows across the walls. Hercule Poirot stood still, his gaze unwavering, his mind a machine of quiet calculation. In his hands, a glass of brandy trembled slightly as the force of the storm sent a jolt of air through the room. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that this case was beginning to reveal a far darker truth than he had expected. The case had begun with a lie. Detective Poirot, you must believe me, Charlotte Mallory pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. I never meant to deceive you. I simply couldn't tell you the truth. Poirot's sharp gaze remained fixed on her, his expression unreadable. He took a sip of the brandy, savoring the warmth that spread through him, allowing the silence to stretch. The lie. It was always a lie. People always lied, especially when the truth would lead them straight into a web of danger. Ah, but mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, his voice calm. You see, the lie is always the beginning of the end. It is the falsehood that unravels the fabric of the mystery. It is the lie that sets the stage for chaos. Charlotte flinched at the weight of his words, and for a moment, Poirot allowed himself the luxury of watching her, studying her reaction. She was hiding something, but what? Her previous nervousness had been replaced by an air of tension, as if she were on the verge of confessing, or perhaps deciding whether or not to continue weaving her deception. Tell me, mademoiselle, Poirot continued, his voice turning ever so slightly colder. What was it you could not tell me? What was this truth you have so carefully concealed? Charlotte hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape. She opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again, as if she feared the very words she was about to say. Poirot, she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. The man who is dead, I know him. I knew him well. But that's not all. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the fear in her eyes palpable. I didn't just know him. She swallowed hard, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I was once involved with him. Poirot's mind shifted gears in an instant, the pieces beginning to fall into place. So the web of lies was thicker than he had imagined. Charlotte Mallory was not merely a frightened woman caught in the crossfire of a twisted game. She was part of the game, and that made her both a player and a potential suspect. Ah, I see, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing slightly. A past connection. How very intriguing. He paused, allowing the weight of the revelation to settle in. Tell me, mademoiselle, what was your relationship with this man? What was it that tied you to him, beyond the obvious? Charlotte shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together. She refused to meet Poirot's eyes, instead focusing on the storm outside. The wind screamed against the windows, as though nature itself were conspiring against her. I can't, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't say. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. But you must, mademoiselle. You see, it is only through your honesty that we may uncover the truth, and in the truth lies the key to your safety. Charlotte shook her head, her voice breaking. If I tell you the truth, Poirot, it will destroy me. You will think me guilty. You will think me the murderer. Poirot rose to his feet, the creaking of the floorboard sounding like a distant drumbeat in the silence that had overtaken the room. His movements were deliberate, his gaze never leaving Charlotte as he slowly walked around the room, inspecting the surroundings with his usual calm precision. He was calculating, analyzing every detail, every gesture. Mademoiselle, I will be the judge of what is true, Poirot said softly. But remember this, it is only when one speaks the truth that one may truly be freed from the shackles of suspicion. Charlotte's hand trembled as she reached for a glass of water on the table beside her. She took a long sip before speaking again, her voice steadying. I was engaged to him, she confessed, her eyes dropping to the glass in her hand. But he betrayed me. He broke my heart, Poirot. And when I found out that he was involved in something much darker than I could ever imagine, I couldn't go back to him. So, I left him. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, a faint glimmer of understanding appearing in his eyes. I see. So it is not only love that binds people, mademoiselle, but also betrayal. He paused, letting the words settle in. And betrayal, that is often the most dangerous of all motives. Charlotte wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek, her fingers trembling. Yes, she said softly, but there's more, much more. The man who is dead, his name was Edward Blackwood. He was a powerful man, Poirot, a man who had enemies everywhere. And I know, someone wanted him dead. And I think that someone might be after me now. Poirot turned to face her fully now, his expression unreadable. And why, mademoiselle, would someone want to kill him? Was it love? Or was it power? Or perhaps revenge? Charlotte's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak. But, before she could form the words, a sudden sound interrupted them both. A knock at the door. Poirot's gaze flicked toward the door, and without a word, he walked toward it, with measured steps. As he opened it, a figure stood in the hallway, drenched from the rain that had begun to pour outside. The man was tall, with dark hair slicked back against his head, and a trench coat that hung loosely from his frame. His eyes were sharp, but there was a weariness about him that suggested something darker lingered just beneath the surface. "I'm sorry to intrude," the man said, his voice low and steady, "but I believe I may be able to help." Poirot's gaze never left the man as he stepped into the room, his eyes scanning him with the same intensity he reserved for every new suspect. "And you are?" Poirot asked, his tone polite but probing. "My name is Julian Moreau," the man said, his eyes flicking to Charlotte before settling back on Poirot. "I was a close friend of Edward Blackwood. I have reason to believe that the situation is far more dangerous than we realize. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his mind already calculating. More lies, more secrets. Julian Moreau was hiding something, and Poirot could feel it. But what? "Ah, you were a friend of Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot said, his voice cool. "And yet you come here, at this hour, in such a state of distress. Tell me, monsieur, why should I trust you?" Julian hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I know who killed him," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "And I think you should know too." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A bold claim. But how much truth was hidden within it? The room grew silent once more, the tension hanging thick in the air like the storm that raged outside. Poirot's mind, however, was already working, sifting through the pieces. Charlotte Mallory's lie, Julian Moreau's cryptic words, and Edward Blackwood's mysterious death. Everything seemed to be interwoven with threads of deception. But Poirot knew one thing for certain. This was a case that had begun with a lie, and every lie, no matter how carefully constructed, would eventually unravel. As he turned back to face the two of them, Poirot's expression remained composed, his voice calm and deliberate. "We shall uncover the truth," he said softly. "And when we do, mademoiselle, monsieur, I trust you will not be surprised by what we find." But Poirot's thoughts were already racing ahead, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. A lie, a betrayal, and a man's death, all tangled in a web of secrets. But whose lie was it? And who was truly guilty? The storm raged on, and Poirot knew the darkness was only just beginning to reveal its true face. Chapter 4. A Fateful Encounter. The candle flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows across the room. The sudden gust of wind that rushed through the cracked window rattled the delicate glass, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace, his silhouette sharp and defined against the warm orange glow, his hands clasped behind his back, as if awaiting something. No, someone. The storm outside was relentless, but it was not the weather that weighed, heavy on his mind. It was the gnawing feeling that something was about to change, something crucial. He had suspected it the moment he entered the house, the way the air seemed to thicken, the way every corner of the manor felt wrong, as if it were holding its breath. It was a feeling he was familiar with, a feeling that would precede a revelation, a confrontation, a fateful encounter. The door to the study creaked open. Poirot turned with precise elegance, his sharp gaze already settling on the figure that appeared in the doorway. A man, tall, his features hidden in the shadow, cast by the dim light, a trench coat clinging to his form, dripping from the rain. A man with the aura of someone who carried secrets too dangerous to be whispered. "You are late, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice cool, betraying none of the tension that had built up in the room. The man's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw something that spoke of hidden motives. It was there, a shift in the air, a slight hesitation. It was subtle, but Poirot never missed the signs. "My apologies, Poirot," the man said, stepping into the room, his voice low and gravelly. "But it seems the storm is not the only thing that has been keeping me from you." "Ah, yes," Poirot replied, his tone smooth. "The storm. It often brings with it not just weather, but interruptions." His eyes never left the man, measuring him. "Tell me, monsieur, what is it that brings you to me tonight?" The man stood still, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on the flickering candlelight. The old furniture, the closed window. He seemed to be gathering himself, but Poirot was not fooled. There was something he was holding back. "I believe you know why I am here," the man said, finally locking eyes with Poirot. His gaze was intense, but not without an underlying uncertainty. "But there is more to this than you realize. Much more." Poirot did not flinch. He had grown accustomed to such declarations, particularly from those who thought themselves to be the orchestrators of grand schemes. But Poirot, as ever, remained the calm center in the storm. "I am listening, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice like velvet, smooth but with an edge of quiet authority. He could feel the man's nervousness now. He was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot was no stranger to such tactics. The man took a deep breath, and with it, the tension in the room seemed to shift. "My name is Alexander Duval," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "And I am the one who knew Edward Blackwood better than anyone. I should have warned him, Poirot. I should have told him everything." Poirot's mind immediately began to turn, dissecting every word. "Should have told him everything," he repeated inwardly, but aloud he said, "You claim to have known Monsieur Blackwood well. What is it that you could have told him, monsieur, that would have changed the course of events?" Duval's eyes flickered briefly to the door, and Poirot noted the subtle shift of his body, as if he were unwilling to speak freely in this room. His hand twitched towards his coat pocket, but stopped halfway. Poirot caught the movement, noting it carefully. I had information," Duval stammered. "Information that could have stopped this tragedy, but I didn't act in time." He swallowed, his throat visibly constricting. "And now it's too late. Edward is dead, and I believe the killer is still out there somewhere, watching us. Calm yourself, monsieur," Poirot interjected smoothly, stepping forward, his presence as commanding as ever. "Take a moment. Breathe. We shall discover the truth. But I must ask you, why did you not come to me sooner? Why now?" Duval's face flushed with a mixture of shame and frustration. He shifted from foot to foot, the weight of Poirot's question pressing down on him. Duval stopped, his eyes darting to the window, his face twitching with distress. "I didn't know who to trust. Not even you, Poirot. I had my suspicions. I thought you might be involved in this too." Poirot remained silent for a moment, his sharp gaze fixed on Duval. The storm outside seemed to intensify, as though nature itself were responding to the growing tension between them. He could feel the lie hanging in the air like smoke, and the truth just beyond his grasp. "You thought me involved?" Poirot asked, his voice a mere whisper, but one that cut through the thick silence like a blade. "A curious accusation, monsieur. You, who are clearly not above suspicion yourself." Duval flinched, his eyes momentarily widening in shock before quickly recovering. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to die on his lips. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, too quiet for Poirot to hear. Poirot stepped closer, his movements deliberate. "You see, monsieur, I am a man who notices things. The smallest of details. For example, your coat. It is soaked from the rain. Yes?" He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "But there is something curious about your appearance. You were not outside for long, were you?" "No, monsieur. You've been inside much longer than the weather would suggest." Duval's face went pale, his hands shaking slightly. He took a step back, his eyes darting toward the door again, as though he were considering fleeing. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, his gaze never leaving the man. "You see, monsieur, A man who lies often forgets the smallest of details, but I never forget. With a quick motion, Poirot turned, his eyes searching the room, glancing over the furniture and the walls with sharp precision. It was in moments like this, when a person's defenses were down, that Poirot's mind worked at its finest. He could sense the pattern now, the web that was being spun around him. Duval's hesitations, his nervousness, the cryptic references to a deeper conspiracy, it was all part of a much larger game. There is more to this story, monsieur, isn't there? Poirot said, turning back to face him, his voice calm and measured. You are not merely here to confess your guilt. You are here because you need me to uncover something for you, something you are afraid to admit. Duval hesitated once again, his face taut with conflict. Finally he spoke, his voice low. I did it, Poirot. I pushed him. I didn't mean to kill him, but I pushed him. He knew something. He knew about the money, the deal we had made. And when I found out what he was planning, I didn't want him to destroy everything. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, though his mind raced. And what was it, monsieur, that Monsieur Blackwood knew? What was this deal that you speak of? Duval swallowed, his body tense. We were partners in a business, but Blackwood, he was involved in something much darker, a trade, smuggling, money laundering. When I realized what he had gotten us into, I tried to pull away. I tried to get out. Poirot's mind raced as Duval's words began to fall into place. A business partnership turned dangerous. Betrayal. Murder. But Duval had not been the only one involved. There were others, unseen, waiting for the right moment to strike. You did not kill him, monsieur, Poirot said softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth. But you are complicit. And now, you fear what will happen when the truth comes to light. Duval's face drained of color, and he opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. Poirot turned toward the window, watching the storm outside. The answers were there, hidden in the chaos of the night, just as the truth had been hidden beneath layers of lies and deceit. He had uncovered the first thread of the mystery, but there was still much to be done. Rest assured, monsieur, Poirot said, as he turned back to face him, his voice calm. This will not end here. The truth always finds its way to the surface, and when it does, you may find that your role in this encounter was but the beginning. As the storm raged on, the room seemed to close in on them, the darkness pressing in from every side. But Poirot, ever the master of his craft, knew that no matter how deep the shadows, the light of truth would always find a way to break through. And soon, he would uncover the rest of the story, piece by piece. Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. The door slammed shut with a deafening finality. Outside, the storm raged with an intensity that seemed to mirror the turmoil within the room. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the grand study, his posture immaculate despite the chaos swirling around him. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert, calculating. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The moment the door closed, it felt as though the walls themselves had moved in, trapping him in a space that would only reveal its secrets when it chose to. The quiet creak of floorboards underfoot echoed through the room like a warning, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Across from him, Charlotte Mallory stood, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together. She had been on edge since their arrival, her every movement tense, her eyes darting to the shadows as though something or someone was watching her. She had always been an enigma, but now Poirot could feel the lie she had been weaving, unraveling before his very eyes. She was hiding something, and he was determined to uncover it. "You have lied to me, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge. "I sense the deceit in the air, and I do not take kindly to being misled. There are secrets behind closed doors, and I will find them." Charlotte's eyes widened, and she took a step back, the light from the candles flickering in her anxious gaze. "Poirot, please, She hesitated, the words caught in her throat as though she were wrestling with herself, struggling to decide just how much of the truth to expose. Poirot's gaze never wavered. He had spent years cultivating the ability to read people, to notice the small details others would miss, the nervous twitch of a hand, the hesitation in a breath, the subtle shifts in a person's body language. And right now, Charlotte Mallory was a woman standing on the precipice of a truth she desperately wanted to keep hidden. "The time for half-truths is over," Poirot continued, his voice as smooth as velvet but cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "You have something to confess, mademoiselle. You cannot hide behind your lies any longer." Charlotte's lips trembled, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might break down entirely. But then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. She straightened her back, lifting her chin with defiance. "I'm not the one who is guilty here, Poirot," she said, her voice unsteady but filled with conviction. "You think I'm hiding something, but I'm not. I swear it." Poirot studied her carefully, noting the way her eyes flickered towards the corner of the room, the subtle shift in her posture that spoke of nerves masked by bravado. It was a small thing, but Poirot had learned long ago that these small things were the clues others overlooked. He could feel the walls closing in, each piece of the puzzle fitting together in ways he hadn't yet fully understood. "No, mademoiselle," he said softly, almost regretfully. "You are not hiding something, but you are part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous, and I intend to uncover it." He moved to the desk, his fingers brushing lightly against the papers strewn across its surface, his eyes scanning the room with meticulous precision. Every detail mattered now, every corner, every creak of the floor, every shadow in the corner of his eye. It all spoke to him. The faint scent of tobacco in the air, the old leather of the chair worn smooth by years of use, the picture frame slightly askew on the mantelpiece, so slight, so subtle, but Poirot knew it had been moved recently. "You are right," Charlotte said, her voice suddenly cold, and Poirot turned to find her eyes locked on him with a new intensity. "I am involved, but I didn't kill him. I didn't kill Edward Blackwood." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Then who did, mademoiselle?" Charlotte bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the floor, as though she were gathering her thoughts, struggling to decide how much to reveal. The silence in the room was thick, pressing against him. Poirot could feel it, like a tightening noose. There was more here, so much more, and Charlotte Mallory was the key. I don't know," she whispered, "but I think I know who might. And I think they've been hiding behind closed doors all along." Poirot felt a flicker of something within him, a sudden realization, a shift in his thinking. "A person hiding in plain sight?" he asked, his voice almost a murmur. Charlotte nodded, though her expression was troubled. "Yes, someone who has been here all along, someone who knew more about Edward Blackwood than anyone realized, and now they're trying to cover it up. They'll stop at nothing to make sure the truth never comes out." Poirot straightened, his mind spinning with the new information. "And you believe this person is in this house, mademoiselle?" he asked, his voice tightening with urgency. Charlotte hesitated for a moment before nodding, her lips parting as though she were about to say something more. But then suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway, followed by a knock at the door. Poirot's eyes flashed, his senses sharpening immediately. "Enter," he called. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped into the room, Julien Moreau. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He was breathing heavily, as though he had just run to get here. "Poirot, you need to—" "Come quickly," Moreau said, his voice tinged with panic. "It's happening. There—" Moreau stopped abruptly, his eyes darting to Charlotte before returning to Poirot. It was a subtle shift, but Poirot caught it, the same flash of recognition, of guilt that had passed through Moreau's eyes earlier when he had first arrived. He was hiding something too. "There what, monsieur?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but sharp. "The body," Moreau said, his voice now trembling. "It's gone. Someone has taken it. Edward's body. It's disappeared. And I'm certain the killer is behind it." Poirot's mind raced. This was a twist he had not expected. The body of the victim vanished without a trace. It could mean only one thing. The killer was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. "What do you mean, monsieur?" Poirot asked, his voice still calm, but now laden with an underlying tension. "The body has simply disappeared. Where? How?" "I don't know," Moreau snapped, his voice breaking. When I went to the room, it was gone. The bed was empty, the sheets torn. It's like someone had come in and taken it." Poirot's gaze shifted back to Charlotte, his eyes narrowing. "Mademoiselle Mallory, do you know anything about this?" Charlotte's eyes widened, and her breath hitched in her throat. "No, Poirot, I swear I don't. I don't know anything." Poirot stepped toward her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He could feel the lie in her words, the truth hidden just beneath the surface. And now, with the body gone, everything was starting to make sense. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. "Ah," Poirot said softly, his voice smooth as silk, "there is something you are not telling me, mademoiselle. Something you are hiding behind your closed door." Charlotte opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her face had gone pale, her hands trembling at her sides. Poirot could see the fear in her eyes now, the terror of being found out, the knowledge that she was standing on the precipice of her own downfall. "The body," Poirot murmured, "has disappeared. But what you have failed to realize, mademoiselle, is that this is not a game you are playing. This is something far darker, and the secrets you've been keeping will come to light, no matter how hard you try to hide them." As he spoke, Poirot's mind raced, the truth beginning to form in his thoughts, but the final pieces were still missing. Who had taken the body? Who was hiding behind the closed doors, pulling the strings of this web of deceit? And why had they waited until now to reveal themselves? The storm raged outside, and Poirot knew that the answer was closer than he realized. Every lie, every half-truth, every hidden detail would eventually surface, and when it did, there would be nowhere to hide. Chapter 6. The Missing Witness. The candlelight flickered, casting a long, trembling shadow on the wall, as Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway, his keen eyes scanning the room. His breath seemed to freeze for a moment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. In the dim glow of the study, everything seemed out of place. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked louder than usual, almost mocking him, and for the first time in days, Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He stepped inside, his gaze moving slowly across the room, and then, in a quiet but undeniable whisper, the room spoke to him. The witness was gone. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his voice steady but filled with an unsettling calm. The very air around him seemed charged with an electric intensity. The missing witness, the one piece of the puzzle that could break the case wide open, had disappeared without a trace. And as always, Poirot was left to sift through the rubble of truth, searching for the slightest fragment that would lead him to the answer. The room was empty. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned chairs or shattered glass, just an oppressive silence that pressed against him, stifling the air. He stepped further inside, his footsteps almost inaudible against the creaking floorboards. The chair where the witness had once sat was now vacant. The only indication that someone had ever been there was a faint indentation on the seat, like a ghostly reminder that someone, had been removed too quickly, too quietly. It was as if the very presence of the witness had been erased from existence. Poirot's sharp gaze flicked to the desk, his mind already calculating. There, amidst the papers and clutter, was a small, crumpled note. He approached it with the precision of a surgeon, carefully unfolding the paper. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. Someone had written this in haste, perhaps in fear. It read, "They know too much. If you want to live, stay silent." The message sent a cold wave through Poirot's chest, and yet, in the depths of his mind, the pieces began to fall into place. They know too much. The witness, whoever they were, had been on the verge of revealing something monumental, something that could shatter the carefully constructed lies surrounding Edward Blackwood's murder. He had to find them, and quickly. "Whoever has taken you, mon ami," Poirot thought to himself, his mind calculating, "will not stop until their secrets are buried forever. But not if I can help it." He folded the note carefully, his mind already working through the possibilities. There were no obvious signs of an abduction, no signs of a struggle, no trail to follow. It was as if the witness had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a whisper of fear and a message that carried more weight than 1,000 truths. Poirot turned sharply as the door opened behind him. A familiar figure stood in the doorway. Julian Moreau, his face pale, his eyes wide with dread. His clothing was disheveled, as though he had been running, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of a sleepless night. "Poirot, it's gone too far," Moreau said, his voice hoarse. He stepped inside, his gaze flickering nervously around the room. "The witness. They were the only one who could help you, and now they're gone. I don't know what to do." Poirot's eyes locked onto Moreau, his expression unreadable. "You know more than you are letting on, monsieur," he said softly, his voice quiet but filled with a calm authority that made Moreau flinch. Moreau opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He looked away, his eyes shifting nervously, and Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. There was something in the man's gaze, something that betrayed a deeper truth. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot continued, stepping closer. "Why are you so frightened? What is it you are hiding?" Moreau swallowed hard, his lips trembling. I don't know. Where they've gone, Poirot. I swear to you I don't know. But Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "Ah, but monsieur, the truth has a way of surfacing, even when one tries to bury it. You know more about this than you care to admit, and that is why you are afraid." Moreau's eyes flickered with panic. "No, Poirot, it's not that. I swear to you, I was just trying to protect her." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Her? Mademoiselle Mallory?" Yes, Charlotte. She's been hiding something. I can't explain it, but I know she's involved. She knows more about Blackwood's death than she's letting on." Moreau's voice was tinged with fear, but there was something else in it too. Guilt. Poirot's mind raced. Charlotte Mallory. Of course. She had been at the center of it all, just as he had suspected. But now, with the witness gone, the situation had become even more complicated. What was she hiding? And why had the witness been so afraid of revealing the truth? The more questions Poirot asked, the deeper the mystery seemed to grow. And with each new twist, he could feel the net tightening around him, forcing him closer to the answer. An answer that he was still not sure he was ready to face. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said softly, his voice now calm, almost disinterested, as if he were merely discussing the weather. "What exactly did you do to protect Mademoiselle Mallory?" Moreau froze, his eyes widening. I don't know what you mean." Poirot's expression hardened. "You are lying to me, monsieur. Do not think for a moment that I will be deceived by your fear. You know exactly what I am speaking of." Moreau's face contorted with guilt. He turned away, unable to meet Poirot's eyes. "I didn't want to get involved," he muttered. "I should have just left, gone back to Paris, but I couldn't leave her alone. Not with all of this happening." Poirot's mind turned over the words, analyzing them with precision. Not with all of this happening. It was a statement that suggested much, more than it revealed. Moreau was hiding something critical. His fear was genuine, but there was something deeper, something darker beneath the surface. His involvement in this case was no coincidence. He knew more than he was letting on. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Moreau's face. "You are not just a passive observer, monsieur. You have been involved in this from the beginning, and now you wish to hide behind your fear, your protection of Mademoiselle Mallory? That I do not believe." Moreau's face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he whispered, almost to himself. Poirot's mind clicked into place. Moreau was not merely a witness, nor was he just trying to protect Charlotte. No, there was something far more significant at play here. Moreau had been a player in this game all along, and now the consequences of his involvement were catching up with him. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said slowly, his voice now hard and cold. "What did you do when you learned the truth about Blackwood's death? And how is it that you knew about the witness before I did?" Moreau stiffened, his eyes darting to the door. "I didn't know what to do," he muttered, his hands trembling. "I didn't know what she had gotten herself into. All I wanted was to protect her, to get her away from this mess. But I couldn't, Poirot. I couldn't stop it." Poirot stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle between them like a weight. The pieces were falling into place, slowly, deliberately. Moreau had been involved with Charlotte, and now he was hiding something crucial. The missing witness, the fear in his eyes, the lies he had told. This was not a simple case of protecting someone. This was something deeper. Poirot turned back to the room, his eyes scanning the empty space, his mind racing with deductions. The witness was gone, but the truth remained. The missing witness was the key, and Poirot knew that whatever secrets had been hidden behind closed doors would soon come to light. Moreau's voice broke through his thoughts. "What do we do now, Poirot?" he asked, his voice heavy with dread. Poirot turned slowly, his gaze unwavering. "We search, monsieur. We search for the one who holds the truth, before they disappear for good." The storm outside howled louder, and Poirot knew that this was the calm before the real storm. The missing witness had become the most dangerous game of all, and Poirot was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. There were no more lies to be told, no more doors to be closed. The final truth was waiting, and Poirot was ready to find it, at any cost. Chapter 7. A Devious Alibi. The clock struck midnight. The storm outside had turned violent, its howls tearing through the night air, but inside the old manor, the silence was far more oppressive. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the tempest, though his mind was far from the weather. Something had shifted. The case had taken a dangerous turn, and he could feel it deep in his bones. It was no longer about simply uncovering the truth. Now it was about playing a game with a far more dangerous adversary, one who was skilled in deception, in weaving stories so intricate that the truth seemed impossible to find. The door to the study creaked open, and Charlotte Mallory entered, her figure bathed in the soft, flickering light of the candles. She looked more fragile than ever, her face drawn, her eyes wide with anxiety. Her presence was no longer a comfort, but a symbol of the tangled mess of lies that surrounded her. Poirot turned to face her, his expression calm, but his mind was already racing through the possibilities. She had claimed innocence from the start, but with every passing hour, her role in this deadly game seemed more ambiguous. Was she the victim, or was she an accomplice to something far darker? "Mademoiselle Mallory," Poirot said, his voice gentle but with an edge of authority that left no room for hesitation. "I trust you are well?" Her lips parted, but the words faltered before they left her mouth. She looked down at her feet, her hands twisting the hem of her dress in nervous tension. She was playing a part. Whether she knew it or not, Poirot could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I don't know what you want from me, Poirot," she finally said, her voice low, strained. "I've told you everything I know. I have nothing to hide." Poirot observed her closely, his mind sharp. "Ah, but mademoiselle, it is not what you tell me that concerns me. It is what you do not tell me that is of interest." Her face paled, and she stepped back, as if trying to distance herself from the accusation that hung in the air. She stammered, unable to meet his gaze, and Poirot could see the uncertainty flickering in her eyes. It was the kind of look one wore when they were trying to make a decision, one that could determine their fate. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I don't know anything more. Please, you must believe me." Poirot took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. He had seen enough deception in his career to recognize it, when it was hidden behind a veil of innocence. He didn't believe her. Not entirely. There was something in her story, in her actions, that didn't add up. The missing witness, the cryptic note, the lies, everything was connected, but the pieces refused to fit together. "Then perhaps it is time we discuss another matter, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "the alibi." Her eyes widened, and for a moment it looked as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. "Alibi?" she repeated, her voice a little too high, a little too sharp. "Oui," Poirot continued, his tone soft, yet insistent. "You claim to have been in your room alone when Monsieur Blackwood was killed. A convenient alibi, is it not? But tell me, mademoiselle, how can you be so certain?" Her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, Poirot saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. She was hiding something vital to the case. You don't think I had anything to do with it, Charlotte whispered, a trace of panic creeping into her voice. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. I do not know, mademoiselle, but your alibi, it is too perfect, and in my experience, perfection is often the first lie. She shook her head violently, her eyes frantic. No, it's the truth. I was alone. I swear. I couldn't have. Poirot raised a hand to silence her, his voice calm and firm. Mademoiselle, I do not doubt your sincerity, but we both know that sincerity is not enough to establish innocence. There must be more. As he spoke, Poirot's mind worked quickly. There was something about the timing of Charlotte's alibi that didn't add up. The piece of the puzzle she had presented was too neatly placed. And then it clicked. The missing witness, the one who had vanished without a trace, leaving only cryptic messages and unanswered questions. This was no accident. The witness had known something critical about the alibi, and now they were gone, erased from the story. Tell me, mademoiselle, Poirot said slowly, his voice almost a whisper, do you know anything about the missing witness? Charlotte's face shifted. The panic in her eyes was replaced with a fleeting moment of something darker, something she had tried to conceal. But Poirot had seen it. The truth was within her grasp, and she had almost given it away. Almost. I don't know where they went, she said, her voice cracking. But I didn't. I didn't want to involve them. They knew too much. And I was afraid they might say something that could ruin everything. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. This was it. She knew something. The witness had been silenced because they were about to reveal the truth, about the alibi, about everything. And now, Poirot knew that the case had entered its most dangerous phase. Whoever was behind this had a motive so strong, so desperate, that they would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. Ah, but, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice cold and precise, you have just given me the most important clue of all. The alibi is not the truth. It is a lie. And someone has gone to great lengths to ensure that this lie is never uncovered. Charlotte's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her voice rising in fear. No, you don't understand. I didn't want to get anyone hurt. I didn't mean for all of this to happen. Poirot stood still, his gaze unwavering. It is too late for regrets, mademoiselle. The game has already begun, and now we must follow the path it leads us down. Just then, the door to the study opened once again, and Julian Moreau entered. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with worry. He looked between Poirot and Charlotte, and then his gaze flicked to the floor. I overheard your conversation, Moreau said, his voice tense, and I think it's time you knew the truth. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he observed Moreau. There was something in his manner now, a certain weight to his presence, that suggested he was ready to confess, or perhaps to shift blame. What is it you wish to tell me, monsieur? Poirot asked, his voice measured, but with an edge of anticipation. Moreau swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small piece of paper, a note. He handed it to Poirot, his face pale. Charlotte didn't kill him, Moreau said, his voice low. But I know who did. Poirot unfolded the note, his mind already racing ahead. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. Meet me at midnight. You will know the truth. But beware. for someone is watching. Interesting, Poirot murmured, his mind calculating furiously. It seems, monsieur, that the truth is closer than we think. But who wrote this note, and why has it only now come to light? Moreau's voice faltered. I found it in the study. I didn't know what to do. But now I think it's time to tell you everything. Poirot studied Moreau for a long moment, his thoughts sharp and piercing. Monsieur, you have just revealed a great deal more than you realize, but I fear the truth you hold may not be as simple as you think. Poirot turned his gaze back to Charlotte, whose face had gone ashen. She stood there trembling, a woman caught between the truth and the lies she had spun. The alibi, Poirot said slowly, his voice echoing in the stillness of the room. It was never meant to protect you, mademoiselle. It was meant to protect someone else. Charlotte's eyes darted toward the door, her lips trembling, as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't. Poirot's mind was already working ahead. The pieces were falling into place, but the final truth, the final twist, was still hidden behind a veil of deception. Do not worry, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. The truth will come to light, and when it does, there will be no more alibis, no more lies, only the truth. The storm outside raged on, but inside the manor, Poirot knew the real storm was only just beginning. And this time, there would be no escape for those who had woven their web of deception. Chapter 8. The Shadow in the Hallway. The hallway was pitch black. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock at the far end of the manor, a low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to echo against the stone walls. Then, from the corner of the hallway, a shadow shifted, a silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of the flickering candlelight. It moved with quiet precision, its presence almost imperceptible, yet undeniably there. And in that fleeting moment, Hercule Poirot knew something was wrong, something was hidden, and it was watching him. He paused, the breath catching in his chest as his eyes locked on the figure, his sharp mind instantly processing every detail, every potential danger. The air was thick with tension. He knew he was not alone. Who is there? Poirot's voice was low, deliberate, yet full of authority. He stood firm, not a single movement betraying his caution. There was no immediate response. The shadow remained still, as though it were a part of the darkness itself. Poirot's mind whirred. Whoever, or whatever, was hiding in the shadows knew they were being watched. This was not a random encounter. This was deliberate. This was planned. He stepped forward, his footsteps barely making a sound as he moved deeper into the hallway, his eyes never leaving the place where the shadow had been. His thoughts raced. The missing witness, the lies, the cryptic messages, everything was building to this moment. The shadow, the one who had been lurking, unseen in the periphery, was no accident. It was the key to unraveling the final strands of this complex web. As Poirot advanced, a sudden creak of the floorboards behind him sent a chill through his spine. He whirled around, his sharp gaze catching the faintest flicker of movement at the far end of the hallway. Another figure, this time a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in the dark shadows of the manor. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by the dim light. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The man was moving slowly, deliberately, as if trying to remain unnoticed, but Poirot had already seen him. "Ah, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence with a quiet authority. "It is never wise to hide in the shadows, especially when one is so easily seen." The man froze, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Then, as though recovering from his shock, he straightened and stepped fully into the light. His face was familiar. Julian Moreau, the man whose alibi had been questioned, whose involvement in the case had become increasingly suspicious. "Poirot," Moreau said, his voice tight, almost too calm. "I did not expect to see you here." "The question, monsieur," Poirot replied, his tone cool and precise, "is why you are here. Why is it that you choose to move about in such secrecy? Are you the shadow that has been watching us?" Moreau's jaw clenched, but he did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes glancing nervously toward the staircase, then back at Poirot. "I was merely checking on something," he said, his words measured, but lacking conviction. Poirot's eyes sharpened. There was a lie in the air. "Ah, monsieur, checking on something? And what, pray tell, are you checking on?" His voice was calm, but it carried an edge of disbelief that was impossible to ignore. Moreau hesitated, his gaze flickering once more to the staircase. "It is nothing, Poirot. You are overthinking. You know how it is in a house like this. So many rooms, so many things left unsaid." Poirot stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his eyes never leaving Moreau's face. "No, monsieur," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen through countless falsehoods. "It is not nothing. You were looking for something. Perhaps something you did not want others to find." The room seemed to grow colder, and Poirot could see the sweat gathering on Moreau's brow, the way his fingers twitched at his side. He was hiding something, something critical, and Poirot could feel the truth slipping just out of reach, like a puzzle with one last piece missing. "It is no use, monsieur," Poirot continued, his voice softer now. "You cannot hide behind your words. I know when someone is trying to deceive me." Moreau's face flushed, his lips pressing together in a thin line. "I'm not deceiving you, Poirot. Ah, but you are," Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "You speak in riddles, you avoid the questions that matter, and you think that your alibi can protect you. But I have seen this before. The truth always comes to light, monsieur. And now you must face it." For a long moment, there was only silence. The storm outside seemed to intensify, its howling wind shaking the windows, but inside, the tension was even more palpable. Poirot stood, his mind racing as he took in every detail, every nuance of the situation. Moreau's fidgeting hands, his hesitation, the fear in his eyes. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said slowly, his voice low but with a commanding authority. "What were you really doing here tonight? And why did you think you could hide in the shadows?" Moreau shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make sure Charlotte was all right," he stammered, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't want anyone to think—" "Charlotte," Poirot interrupted, his voice growing colder. "So, it is her you are trying to protect then? But tell me, monsieur, why does she need your protection? What is it that you are keeping from me?" Moreau's eyes darted to the door, as though considering running. But then he slumped in defeat. "I did it," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Finally, the truth was slipping out. He had known it all along, but hearing it from Moreau's lips made it all the more real. "You killed him," Poirot said softly, almost to himself. His voice was calm, but his mind was racing. This was the moment that would turn everything upside down. "You killed Edward Blackwood." Moreau's head shot up, his face pale. "No, no, Poirot, you've got it all wrong." But Poirot shook his head, cutting him off. "Ah, but it is not so, monsieur. You are not as innocent as you wish to appear. The shadows have been your refuge, but you cannot hide in them forever. You killed Blackwood because you feared the truth would destroy everything you had worked for." Moreau recoiled, a wave of panic flooding his face. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. He threatened me, Poirot. He knew about the business, the illegal deals. He was going to ruin everything." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "And so, you took his life. You thought you could silence him forever. But you see, monsieur, that is the problem with lies. They always come back to haunt us." Moreau's breath hitched, his hands trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he whispered, almost pleading. "But when he said he was going to the police, I had no choice. I had to stop him." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he processed the confession. "And so you created an alibi for yourself. You thought you could outsmart me, hide behind your perfect story. But the shadows, they gave you away." Moreau's face crumpled, the mask of confidence shattering completely. He sank to his knees, his voice breaking as he confessed everything. "I didn't want to lose everything," he said in a hoarse whisper. "The money, the power, Charlotte, she was everything to me. But when Blackwood found out, I had to protect myself." Poirot stood still, his mind working as the final pieces of the puzzle locked into place. The shadow in the hallway, the missing witness, the devious alibi, it was all part of a carefully constructed web of lies. Moreau had been the architect of it all, but now the truth had finally been revealed, and there would be no more hiding. "Your actions have consequences, monsieur," Poirot said softly, his voice devoid of pity. "You thought you could escape, but there is no escape from the truth. The shadow may have followed you, but now the light has found you." As Poirot turned and walked away, he could feel the weight of the case lifting. The storm outside had begun to subside, but within the manor, the silence felt heavier than ever. The shadows had been exposed, the lies unraveled, and in the end, only the truth remained. The final piece had fallen into place, and Poirot knew that the game was finally over. But the last words he would leave with would echo in his mind, a reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, the truth would always find its way to the surface. Ah, but human nature, monsieur. It never changes. Not for anyone. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Confession. The storm outside had reached its crescendo. The wind howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows of the old manor as Hercule Poirot paced back and forth in the study. His sharp eyes were narrowed in concentration, his mind whirring with deductions, yet something unsettled him. He could feel it, the suffocating weight of the truth that had been hiding in plain sight, always just beyond his reach. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the oppressive silence, the soft creak of the door opening behind him. Poirot's body froze, but his mind had already caught the faintest whisper of movement. His instincts, honed over years of investigation, flared to life. "Ah, you have arrived," Poirot said softly, turning with a calm, deliberate motion. His voice carried the elegance of a man in control, a man who had long mastered the art of reading people. The figure standing in the doorway was none other than Julian Moreau. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed, with the weariness of someone who had carried a secret for far too long. Moreau's voice faltered his hand gripping the door frame as though it were the only thing holding him upright. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, as though the very elements were echoing the tension in the room. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but his mind remained razor-sharp. He could sense that something was about to break. "You have come to speak, monsieur?" Poirot asked, his voice a perfect blend of courtesy and command. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Moreau's face. "Perhaps you have come to finally reveal what has been hidden for so long." Moreau swallowed, his lips trembling. "I can't—" He stopped, his breath coming in short gasps. "I can't live with it anymore, Poirot. I have to confess." The words landed like a thunderclap in the stillness of the room. Poirot's heart quickened, but he remained composed. His mind was already dissecting the confession, considering all the possibilities, all the twists that could come with it. "You will confess, monsieur?" Poirot's voice was low, as if testing the weight of the words. He stepped closer still, his expression unreadable. "What is it that you wish to confess?" Moreau's eyes darted toward the door, as though he feared someone would overhear. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I killed Edward Blackwood." The confession hung in the air, heavy and final, as if the very act of speaking it had stripped him of whatever remained of his innocence. Poirot's gaze didn't falter. He was silent for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle between them. His mind, however, was already at work, processing, calculating. Moreau had confessed, but Poirot knew there was more to this than met the eye. The alibi, the suspicious behavior, the lies, it was all too neat, too perfect. And perfect lies always had a crack, a flaw, a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. "Mon Dieu, monsieur," Poirot said softly, his eyes scanning Moreau with a new intensity. "You claim to have killed Edward Blackwood, but why? What was your motive?" Moreau's face twisted, with a mixture of guilt and fear. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted to protect her." "Her?" Poirot repeated, his voice cool but sharp. "You refer to Mademoiselle Mallory?" Moreau nodded, his breath ragged. "She was involved, Poirot. She didn't know about the things I'd done. But Blackwood, he was going to tell her. He was going to ruin everything. I couldn't let him. So I did it." Poirot's mind raced, but his expression remained calm, as though he were merely piecing together an ordinary puzzle. "You killed Blackwood to protect Mademoiselle Mallory?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "But why would you feel the need to protect her from a man who was already dead?" Moreau's face contorted in pain. "Because she doesn't know everything. She doesn't know what Blackwood was into. The smuggling, the laundering. He had dirt on everyone. I had to stop him before he could destroy her too." Poirot studied him carefully. "And yet, monsieur, you did not stop him by confronting him directly. No, you chose to kill him in secret, to lie about your whereabouts, to fabricate an alibi. Why? Why not just come clean to me?" Moreau's eyes flashed with panic. "I couldn't, Poirot. I couldn't let you think I was involved in this. It would have ruined me. You don't understand." "Ah, but I do understand, monsieur," Poirot interrupted gently, his voice as precise as ever. "You were afraid of losing everything. The money, the power, the control you had over Mademoiselle Mallory. But what you did not count on, monsieur, was the truth which always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it." Moreau's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Poirot saw the true extent of the man's guilt. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I did. I did it all. And now, he trailed off, his voice breaking. Now, I'm going to lose everything anyway. Poirot's mind turned over the pieces of the puzzle, the threads weaving together with a clarity that made his heart race. This was it. This was the twist he had been waiting for. Moreau had killed Blackwood. But there was more to the story, more that had yet to be revealed. You see, monsieur, Poirot said, his voice colder now, I suspect that your confession is not the final piece. I suspect that the truth you have told me is, in fact, a lie. Moreau's eyes widened in shock. What? What do you mean? I've confessed. I killed him, Poirot. Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur. You may have killed Blackwood, but you are not the only one involved in this web of deceit. The real killer, the one who manipulated you into doing this, is still out there, and they are far closer than you realize. The air in the room grew still, as though time itself had stopped. Poirot's words hung in the silence, heavy with implication. Moreau looked at him, his face pale, his hands trembling. You see, Poirot continued, his voice quiet but steady, the confession you have made is too convenient, too neat. It absolves you, and yet, in doing so, it hides the real truth. You are merely a pawn in a larger game, monsieur. Moreau's face twisted with confusion. I don't understand. I killed him. I did it. I've confessed. What more do you want from me? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he watched Moreau, his mind calculating. I want the truth, monsieur, the full truth, and that truth does not lie in your confession. It lies in what you have failed to tell me. For a moment, Moreau's face was an open book, the fear and guilt written plainly in every line. But then, something flickered in his eyes, a realization, a moment of clarity. And then he spoke, his voice trembling with terror. It wasn't just me, he whispered. It was Charlotte. She made me do it. Poirot's eyes widened, but only for a moment. The pieces were falling into place now, the puzzle pieces clicking together with a satisfying clarity. Charlotte Mallory, the woman he had suspected all along, had been the mastermind behind it all. Moreau had been her accomplice, manipulated by her fear and her desperation. Ah, Mademoiselle Mallory, Poirot murmured, his voice calm, but with an edge of finality. So, it is she who is the true architect of this tragedy. She used you, monsieur, as a means to an end. You were never the one in control. Moreau looked up, his face stricken with disbelief. No, Poirot. She loved me. She never wanted this to happen. Poirot's expression hardened. Love is a powerful motivator, monsieur, but it can also blind one to the truth. Mademoiselle Mallory's love was a weapon, and she used you to eliminate the threat Blackwood posed to her secrets. Moreau recoiled, his face a mixture of shock and horror. You don't understand. She couldn't. But I do understand. Monsieur, Poirot interrupted, his voice low and firm. You see, I have learned long ago that human nature is always the same. People will do anything to protect themselves, even if it means destroying the ones they love. As the words left his mouth, Poirot could feel the weight of the revelation settle over him. The final twist, the unexpected confession, had come not from the man who had committed the murder, but from the one who had orchestrated it all. Charlotte Mallory had used Julian Moreau as a tool in her web of deceit. And now, with her carefully constructed lies beginning to unravel, Poirot knew that the final confrontation was at hand. Moreau's face was pale, his hands trembling as the full weight of his involvement sank in. He had been manipulated, yes, but he was no less guilty for it. And now, the truth was finally within reach. "Ah, but human nature, monsieur," Poirot said softly, as if speaking to himself. "It never changes. We are all capable of great deception, but in the end, it is the truth that prevails." The storm raged on outside, but Poirot knew that the real storm was only just beginning. The game was over, and the truth had been revealed, and with it, the consequences that would change everything. Chapter 10. The Clue That Changed Everything. The clock chimed once and then twice, its deep toll echoing through the silent hallways of the manor. The sound was unnaturally loud, each strike reverberating against the walls like the beating of a drum, heralding a moment that would change everything. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the floor, his mind a whirling engine of thought. When he heard the door creak open behind him, he did not need to turn. He already knew who it was. It was Julien Moreau, his once confident posture now reduced to a hunched figure, his face ashen, eyes shadowed with defeat. The man's presence sent a ripple through the air, as if the weight of guilt were a tangible thing that had arrived before him. "I've been waiting for you, monsieur," Poirot said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. He turned slowly to face Moreau, his movements deliberate, as if every second were an intricate part of the puzzle he was about to solve. "You have something to tell me, I believe." Moreau opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to choke him, as if something deep inside had locked them away. He clenched his fists, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Then, with a sudden burst of emotion, he exhaled and finally whispered, "I did it. I killed him." The confession was a shock, but Poirot, ever the composed detective, did not flinch. His mind, as it always did, absorbed the words with rapid precision, filtering them into the context of the case. "You killed Edward Blackwood," Poirot said, his voice measured, as if repeating the facts of a case he had already solved. He took a deliberate step toward Moreau, his gaze never wavering. "And yet, monsieur, your confession is, how shall I say, rather too convenient." Moreau looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? I've confessed. I didn't want to, but I had to. Blackwood knew too much. He was going to expose everything. He was going to ruin Charlotte." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, you are guilty of a great many things. But murder?" Poirot shook his head. "No, that does not fit. It does not match with what I have observed." Moreau's confusion deepened, and Poirot continued. "You see, monsieur, this case is like a finely woven tapestry. One must approach it with patience, but also with a keen eye for the smallest of details." Poirot paused for a moment, allowing the tension to grow, before speaking again. "It was not you who killed Blackwood, was it?" The words hung in the air like a whisper on the wind. Moreau's face turned pale as the truth began to dawn on him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Poirot turned away, walking toward the desk where the scattered papers from the investigation lay, as if inspecting them for the first time. His eyes skimmed the surface, and there it was. His sharp mind instantly alighted on the small, seemingly insignificant clue that had slipped through his grasp until now. A piece of paper, tucked beneath a letter, a subtle crease in the paper, a subtle detail that had been overlooked by everyone involved. It was a letter from Blackwood's personal lawyer, dated the day before his death. It mentioned an ongoing investigation that Blackwood had been a part of, one that had involved people close to him, people who had hidden themselves in the shadows. Poirot's fingers brushed over the paper, his heart quickening, as the realization hit him. The piece of the puzzle he had been searching for was right in front of him, hidden beneath layers of lies and misdirection. "Do you see now, monsieur?" Poirot said, his voice a whisper, though his tone held the weight of a conclusion years in the making. "The alibi you have constructed, the story you have told, it has all been to conceal the truth. The real killer is not you, Moreau." Moreau stared at him, his eyes wild with panic. "No, I don't understand. Who else could it be?" Poirot turned, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the man before him. "The one who was hiding in plain sight, monsieur. The one who knew how to cover their tracks, how to manipulate everyone around them." Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper, though it carried the weight of his certainty. "Mademoiselle Mallory." The words hit like a thunderclap, the shock evident on Moreau's face as his knees buckled and he collapsed into a chair. "What are you saying?" Moreau whispered, his voice barely audible. "Charlotte, no, it can't be. She loved me. She couldn't." Poirot's gaze remained unwavering. "It is always the ones we least suspect who hold the greatest power. Mademoiselle Mallory was not the innocent woman she appeared to be. No, monsieur. She is the one who played the game from the very beginning, pulling the strings and weaving the web of deceit. She knew everything. She was the one who orchestrated it all." Moreau shook his head, disbelief still lingering in his eyes. "But why? Why would she?" Poirot stepped closer, his voice now full of quiet authority. "Power, monsieur. Greed. She sought to protect herself from the truth, from the consequences of her actions. She used you, manipulated you, and in doing so, she pushed you into a position where you were forced to make a choice. To protect her, you killed Blackwood." Moreau's face was pale, his body trembling with the weight of Poirot's words. He had been played, and now the full extent of his involvement in the crime was clearer than ever. But something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition, as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. "I didn't know," Moreau whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know she was capable of this." Poirot's gaze softened just for a moment. "Ah, monsieur, you are not the only one deceived by her, but it is you who, in your desperation to protect her, has come to me, seeking forgiveness for the crime that you did not commit." Moreau looked up at Poirot, his face a mixture of guilt and remorse. "What will happen now?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Will she be arrested?" Poirot paused, his expression unreadable. "The law will take its course, monsieur, but the truth has a way of revealing itself in the end, and in this case, it is a truth that cannot be hidden." Poirot turned back toward the desk, his eyes scanning the room with the meticulous precision that had become second nature to him. He had unraveled the lies, peeled back the layers of deceit, and now the truth stood in front of him, undeniable. Charlotte Mallory had been the mastermind behind the murder of Edward Blackwood, using those around her as pawns in a dangerous game of manipulation. And now her secrets were no longer safe. "The truth, monsieur, is always the last to come forward," Poirot murmured, more to himself than to Moreau. "But when it does, it changes everything." As Poirot turned toward Moreau once more, he could see the man's eyes filled with a mixture of dread and acceptance. "It is not too late for redemption, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "But first, you must face the consequences of your actions. You cannot escape the truth." The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the storm outside had finally begun to calm. Poirot stood still, his sharp mind still turning over the pieces of the case, even as the weight of the revelation settled in. The final twist had come, and with it, the resolution that had been so carefully concealed in the shadows. The game was over. The last lie had been exposed. As Moreau stood to leave, his steps slow and heavy, Poirot allowed himself a single, fleeting thought. The truth had changed everything, and now it was time for those who had hidden in the shadows to face the consequences of their deceit. But as he stood alone in the room, the clock still ticking its relentless rhythm, Poirot could not help but smile, just slightly. Ah, but human nature, it never changes, he mused aloud, as the storm outside finally began to subside, leaving in its wake a silence that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 truths. And with that final thought, Hercule Poirot knew that the case had been solved, completely, utterly, and undeniably. The last clue had changed everything, and now nothing would ever be the same again.